Hi, I'm Theo, and these broadcasts are to support the blogs on nomorec.com's website as well as the online classes. In this episode, we briefly touch upon the divine name. Welcome back to the No More C broadcast. Today's episode, we're going to briefly touch upon the divine name, where we just have a short reflection on some of the things that I feel like that need to be fleshed out a bit. The studies into this are so vast, and it could go on endlessly, and there's so much you could dig into and say about it, that in today's study we just offer up a few reflections that may seem to bear more with the content that we've been pursuing at the moment in that context alone, while never, ever attempting to try to explain the divine name in its fullness, because that could go on for a long time. So we hope you enjoy the content and continue our discussion in the participation series on being as we were always meant to be. So God reveals himself to Moses at the burning bush in Exodus chapter 3, verse 14. And when Moses asked God, who do I say has sent me? Who is the God that I need to go by? Because, Moses is playing a stranger to danger. And not exactly sure, and he wants to clarify and make certain things. And we get this revelation of Yahweh as being the great I am. And, Yahweh is our understanding of the best way that scholars have understood how to implement the divine name, the tetragrammaton, in simple English transliterated pronunciation. And so it has the idea that God is, and we can think about God as being and what it means to be, and he's ever in the present tense. He's ever outside of time. He always is. There's no was to God, and there's no necessarily will be in that sense. But at the same time, it does have this nuance in the Hebrew of I will be. I am what I am. I am, that's you just can't control that. I am what I want to be. And I'm the ultimate sovereign. So I'm sovereign over all things. I'm ultimately what is sovereign, what is God. I am whatever I want to be and whatever I will be. But we talked about in a previous podcast about, in Isaiah 46:10 that God will accomplish. And so in the beginning, Yahweh is the God, and there's nothing else. He just is. That's what we talked about. And then he's the creator of everything that comes to be. So he's the origin of all being. Ontologically, he's just the supreme being. But in a sense, he's also understood to be the source of all being. So there's nothing that is that did not have its origins in Yahweh in that sense. So he's what it means to be. He's the supreme being. As we said again in previous videos, he's the best expression of what being is, and what we're trying to participate, and what we're trying to mirror, what we're trying to image, what we're trying to be ourselves. It's that goal, that telos, that end. That's what we're shooting for. And we covered Isaiah 46:10, and especially in the Greek, and we were referring to, how God will be what he always said. So in the beginning, we have God. That's just what it is. In the beginning, God. Right? And God had his plan for what he wanted things to be. But obviously, through different rebellions that we hope to cover at some point on this channel, different points of rebellion and different things happen. And we've already talked about some of that, how um, our trajectory, our goal is to go upward toward God. And the more we're like God, the more we be what we're supposed to be. And we can emulate that and participate in that. And as C.S. Lewis, we can become more like heavenly creatures, heavenly creations, as we were, originally designed to be. Or we can also decline and descend and get away from and go in the opposite direction and not be. And we talked about, again, how repenting is trying to be what God is. But at the same time in that, Isaiah 46:10, God is going to, in the end, will be what God is, regardless, with or without you, as we quoted that U2 song, the lyrics. And God is going to be what God will be, regardless of what we do. He's still... That we're still on plan A. There is no plan B. We're still doing plan A. This is always what was meant to be, in a sense of what God had planned. And he's allowing us as stewards of his creation to take these rabbit trails. But that's out of his great wisdom and love. But that's not who he is. That's who we have become. So that's poor reflections of him and poor imaging, and we produce the wrong image. And so we're not being what we're supposed to be, and that's why. So the reason why the world is the way it is not because this is what God created. What God created is Genesis chapter 1 and 2. What we did from Genesis 3 onwards is what it is. And what will be is what God is. I will be what I want to be whenever I want to be it. And I'm totally sovereign. And so nothing is above me. Everything is below me, and I'm all powerful. And I will do what I do. And I like it. One of my favorite verses is Abraham in Genesis 18, verse 25. He just says, shall not the judge of the earth do right? Because I can't bargain with this guy. I can try to play games with God, but God is going to be what God will be regardless. And I just have to trust in that. I just have to trust him to be what he will be, because that is what's right. No matter the circumstance or situation. I just have to trust in it. And so for his nephew Lot, he had to trust God. And we all face those moments of trials, testing, temptation, in a sense that life brings us. And we find ourselves in moments of faith and moments of trying to discern our faith and decide. And we're figuring out this trust relationship. And we in our frailty, sometimes falter in our trust. But God is, and God will be, and it's interesting, there's no past tense, but in Revelation we have the one who was, the one who is, and one who is to come, and it kind of covers that God is everything in all time. He's from the beginning, so he was, and he's ever present, he always is, and he will be. When everything else ceases to exist, he is all there is left. And unless we participate in him, we will cease, in some sense, to be. So as far as what we are. And that is our hope. That is our calling, to become godlike, to become godly, not to become God, not to become a member of the Trinity, but to become as much like him as we possibly can, knowing that we're empowered by him and his spirit and his grace to do that, to represent him, to participate in him, but not ever to be exactly, precisely what he is, but to participate in as much of that as we can. And so the divine name, interestingly, implies this sovereignty, and implies this definition of what it means. God is life, and God is love, and God is all these things, and whatever we think the most excellent thing is, that's God. He's the superlative of everything, in that sense, of all that's good. And anything that is lacking is due to our privation away from him, due to our own separation. Isaiah 59, 1 and 2. Our sin separates us. It's our separation. And Adam and Eve had to leave the garden and be separated from God due to their poor choices. And they were separated, deprived of access to the presence of God. And to enter into sacred space, we have to become as much like him as we possibly can through ritual and liturgy, and to be in his presence. And that's the model of our reality. We're trying to become more like him in everything we do, so that we can fully participate with him in the eschaton, as Revelation 21 and 22 envisions, based off again what Isaiah says in 65 and 66. And that's the picture. That's our end. That's our goal. To be like Christ as much as possible, which is the goal of Christians. That God saves us from things that are chaotic and sin, where we are separated from God's grace and from God's presence and from God's life, and we experience death and deprivation due to privation, due to our separating ourselves from God. And so it's this idea, all encompassed in the divine name, that he is and will be, and I am and I will be. And Moses is a choice, and we all do, to become more like that or to become less like that. And he's going to be what the ultimate is. And if we don't want any part of that, then that's going to be problematic, because whatever our desire is, if it's not of God, that is going to have to cease to be, in some sense, in some way. And different people frame it differently in their theology of what it means to experience eternal privation from God, even if that, in some models that phraseology just doesn't even work. So, but that's not the point of this video. It's just, again, understanding what God exemplifies as the ultimate. So there are gods, but there's only one capital G-O-D. And there's being, but there's only one being with a capital B that represents what true existence is and was designed to be, as he models for us. And so he makes Eden and says, now go outside of Eden and make everything else just like this. And as I have ordered this from chaos into what it is, now you go do the same thing for the balance that's outside, that I have left for you to do as artisans, as craft persons, to go out and craft the rest of creation and shepherd it into the blessings that I have for it. But I'm leaving that up to you to do. And that was the original design and intent. Nothing was perfect. It was all good, but it wasn't perfect. But there was this realm that was needing tamed, that was outside, whereby humanity was sent into that realm to shepherd it into being what Eden was. And they end up failing and being kicked out into that place, and then working from that place and struggling with the chaos to try to order it, while at the same time being under their own curse and having, rebelled, and then repeated rebellions, and it just gets worse. And we have the world that we have today, which is nothing like what we began with, and is nothing at all like what it will be. But see, God is not the God of this world. He's not in charge unless we choose to let him be by manifesting and participating in his kingdom rule. So here on the earth as it is in heaven, God's kingdom manifested in his body and in his temple, as we are the third temple of that Holy Spirit, and we are the body of Christ. We are to transform not only our own lives, but all of creation as much as possible into the good, until that which is perfect comes, when God will be what God will be. And so it reflects sovereignty. It reflects the fact that he, is, and he's unchangeable. And yet he's transformational, trying to bring everything to that identity that was initially our mandate. And we got off track through our rabbit trails and need to turn once again back. And that's what repenting is, a constant state of changing from where we are. And as our circumstances and situations change, we change into what we're supposed to be. Kind of like what Bob Sergey described as a thermostat. When the weather changes outside, a thermostat sets the temperature, and that's it. And no matter what the outside does, the thermostat uses its mechanisms to create the same environment no matter what happens. And thermometers react. They go up and they go down, and they go up and they go down, depending on what's going on, depending on any outside influence. But when we're talking about transformation, we're trying to be those thermostats that set the temperature despite the circumstances. And that's a little bit of what we're talking about here, in the sense that God is, no matter what happens. And he will be. And we need to participate in that. So that's a little bit of my understanding of a sense of the divine name. Thank you very much, and God bless you for listening. Stay tuned for more episodes in videos to help you with your journey from nomorec.com.